We came to feed children, not fuel empires. Admiral Mara Kinloch stood with one hand on the cold railing of Flag Deck 3 as the blockade lights of the Naraka Gate pulsed a sickly amber. The pulse synchronized with the breathing of the fleet reactor hums. Coolant sighs, the steady tremor of mass drivers warming in their housings. 200,000 displaced civilians waited behind her convoy, tucked into haulers with thin hulls and thinner patients, each one watching the same stark label scrolling across every public console. Ultimatum expires in 2700. The Aero Compact had seeded mines along the transit cone, drones hovering like hornets around a sugar spill, daring her to push through and take the consequences. Kinloch's jaw clenched as the countdown rolled to 2659 and the distant starfield quivered under ECM glitter. "Palladium," she said, eyes tracing the lattice of interdiction beacons that bracketed the corridor. Confirm the wording again. The fleet mind's voice arrived like a bell stroked by velvet. Verbatim. "Human fleet, remain in place. Power down all weapons. Dump contraband hulls and acknowledge inspection. Non-compliance triggers punitive fires against civilian carriers. You have 30 minutes to comply." Timer corroborated at 26 minutes, 31 seconds. They broadcast from Node Herald. Mask lift shows compact signature. "Punitive fires," Kinloch murmured, breath fogging the rail. The air tasted faintly of copper from overworked scrubbers. Always the poetry of people who don't plan to watch. Sol, her executive officer, stepped to her elbow with a tablet that shed a pale rectangle across his knuckles. "The haulers are cycling panics. Admiral, 47 requests to surrender cargo if it spares families. Food and medfoam pallets flagged as contraband. Medical bays bracing for pressure injuries even on hold." "Patch through," Kinloch said. Her voice went to the convoy with the low, sustained calm of someone sealing a hatch. "This is Kinloch. You are under our care. You are not contraband. You are not alone. The clock is not your shield, and it is not our master." Coolant hissed through the superstructure as the fleet shifted posture by 3 degrees, a subtle drift that painted different angles on the compact's sensors. The tactical table showed the corridor as a thin yellow cone threaded through chaff and mines. A throat with teeth. "Bliteri." Onave flicked icons with 2 precise fingers, her nails short, her sleeves rolled. Her console threw green freckles across her cheekbones. "Admiral, micro-drones at Vector 12 accelerating. They're sending beacons forward to tag our heat. Their doctrine assumes we'll shoulder the blame if anything in the convoy vents. They want us to blink at the ledger." "We don't blink," Ensign Tarek Jane muttered from comms, then looked like he wished he could tuck the words back into his chest. "We do not blink," Kinloch said. "Steady, but we do count seconds." "Palladium. Push me delta lattice geometry." "I want to see how their hornet cloud reads a false throat." Projecting now, Palladium replied. The tactical holosphere shifted, showing ghost corridors folded around the real one, all in tight. Elegant curves like a glass blower's breath, frozen mid-swell. If we seed our mirror webs inside their beacon shells, we can make their emitter phase believe we've powered down and opened bays. Their sensors are optimized for confession, not deception. "Admiral," Sol said, "you want to make them assume compliance. We'll let them read the posture they crave while we sculpt the truth." Kinloch answered. She could feel the subtle vibration of the flagship's skin through the rail, a comforting animal purr. "Call it a courtesy before we teach them why they should retire this doctrine. Mercy with teeth is still mercy." Civilian vignette. In Hauler 9, a woman named Del Rey cinched her son's suit harness and pretended the buckle was a game. She kept her voice bright while the cabin fluorescents strobed on low power, each flicker like a skipped heartbeat. "When the lights count," she said. We breathed together. The boy blew his cheeks and released them in exaggerated huffs. Far aft, coolant pumps shuddered and an aftertaste of ozone crept along the vents. A man across the aisle wore a faded port uniform and wrapped a cloth around his palm, hiding a grease burn he didn't want examined. People counted aloud while trying not to look at the window slits where the distant blockade lights flashed a warning. Someone whispered a prayer they half remembered from a childhood on a different star. The timer ticked to 25:02 and the room grew very, very quiet. "Admiral," Vey said beneath the fleet rumble, "their micro-drones are within tagging range. If a hauler thruster hiccups, they'll record it as hostile motion." "Palladium," Kinloch said. "Give me noise that smells like surrender and tastes like patience. Push it in pulses that line up with their beacon heartbeat." "Compiling," the AI said. A soft shimmer passed along the flag deck's railing as localized screens recalibrated. The projection showed decoy sail forms blossoming in the field like thin, rippling ribs. They carried the thermal signatures of open bays and cooling weapons, a posture translation rather than a spoof. Note, Palladium added, if they fire on the convoy under conditions their system reads as compliant, their punitive doctrine takes a public wound. Their policy requires a clean causality chain, which they think they own because they wrote the outcome first, Sol said. Kinloch nodded. And outcomes written first are fragile when held to light. We broke no promise. We broke their script. The countdown brushed 24:00. The blockade's amber rhythm made Kinloch's teeth ache. She had read Aero Compact dispatches for a month, enough to taste the cadence of people who believed the universe improved when other people lacked options. "Raffi," she said to Sol. "Notify medical, they'll see stress syncope and wrists bruised from bracing. Quiet triage. And remind security to keep the Marines out of civilian aisles unless asked. I want kindness so obvious it shows on a scope." "Understood." "Vey, seed the mirror webs," Kinloch said. "Not the huge ones. The little combs." The tactical officer's fingers danced. The flagship's bays exhaled, and on the main screen, gossamer combs drifted forward, threads of conductive film strung across smart dust like dew caught in an invisible hedgerow. They were not weapons. They bent signal vectors and sang to sensors in the key of false calm. "Comb webs away," Vey said. "ECM dressing applied. We'll draw their drones into our song." "Palladium," Kinloch said. "Put a face to their voice." Static resolved into a cool-eyed woman with a clipped crest of silver hair and an ornamental collar of slate triangles. The background showed Node Herald's cold geometry muscled beams. A sparse crew. "Admiral Kinloch," she said, as if tasting something sour. "I am Prefect Asera Vale of the Aero Compact. You have 23 minutes. We will not be moved by recitations of need. We will be moved by compliance." Kinloch kept her own face without feed smoothing. The line hissed softly. She could smell hot plastic from the comm rack. "Prefect Vale," she said. "We're moving food and bandages, not weapons. Your punitive fires will burn faces I can name. I ask for a corridor, not indulgence." "You have a corridor," Vale said. The camera pivoted a fraction to show the thin yellow cone through mines and drones. "Transit in file. Submit to inspection. Dump contraband to the void. Afterward, Your carriers and their cargo may proceed. Our cargo, Kinloch said, is hunger the shape of children's ribs. We submit to inspection at the nearest neutral port. Recorded by both sides. Your doctrine's cost will be counted where families can see it. We have written the cost already, Vale said. What you do now is decide who pays it. Your paper threats will not survive air. The fleet smelled faintly of ionized dust as comb webs took purchase inside the compact's beacon volumes. Palladium's status murmurs washed the deck like rain. Link 1 anchored, Link 2 pruned, Link 3 humming. Gian glanced up from comms. Admiral, 5 civilian captains request to turn and run. Their crews are seeing the timer and losing nerve. Patch me, Kinloch said. She put both hands on the rail and kept her voice low. Captains, you know your ships better than I ever will. If you choose to run, you'll head into minds that don't know the difference between fear and recklessness. If you stay, you will taste copper in the air and wish clocks were gentler. But you'll live to complain about me afterward. I would prefer the second option. Silence spread for 3 heartbeats, a soft pressure like the weight of a hand. Then a new voice, old and sandpapered. We'll hold, the hauler said. But my grandson's in the forward bunk. Tell your clever ghost in the hull to keep singing. I will sing, Palladium said across the civilian channel, and its voice was like a lullaby wrapped in numbers. We will outlast your hunger for spectacle. Escalation 1 arrived from the compact with a clinical neatness that made Kinloch's shoulders itch. Prefect Vale's drones brightened as they queried the new posture, found compliance signatures, and drifted closer to pin the convoy inside a ring of observation. Vay made a soft noise. All teeth. They're stepping into our mirrors, she said. They think they found knees. Good, Kinloch said. Now give our haulers edges worth hiding behind. The comb webs refracted the compact's active pings into calm, and the convoy's shape inside the corridor thickened, becoming a false wall of inactivity with sharp boundaries. The drones settled around the walls outside like gulls around a sleeping whale. Vale's voice returned with brittle surety. We observe compliance. Any deviation from this posture will trigger enforcement. Time remaining 20 minutes, Yin whispered. They wanted us docile on their cameras. Vay's lip curled. And docile is exactly what we'll use. Palladium chimed. Note they have placed mines with optical fuses inside the throat. The devices are set to ignore steady flows and punish acceleration. This is a doctrine optimized to harvest excuses. They harvest excuses, Kinloch said, and sell the pulp as order. She flexed her fingers and felt a slight sting in her left wrist, where she'd braced too hard last drill. Phase 2. Raf, mark me a slow push with Hauler 12 as the painted lead. Ona, weave the corridor backwards. I want our tail to look like our nose. Understood, Sol said. Medical confirms they're ready for pressure drops if a hauler flinches. They smell burned filters and they're not complaining. Vay, Kinloch added, leave a throat inside their throat. Something a person like Vale couldn't ignore if she was worried about her career. I can make them a temptation, Vay said. A clean legal bite that looks like we consent to a sample. Do it, Kinloch said. Jean, keep Vale's line open. I want her to hear us wait. We make stillness sharp enough to cut. Civilian vignette. On Carrier Lumen. A nurse named Yago tightened the strap on a med foam crate and checked the seals on his gloves. He could feel each heartbeat in his fingertips where the suit's haptics synced to keep hands from fumbling. The deck under his boots drifted a fraction to port. Someone had been slow on a thruster. He tasted stale coffee lingering in his mask from a night of triage drills. A teenager perched on a crate nearby with her chin tucked into her knees, listening to the timer tick down on a public screen. "Is it like the vids?" she asked. Yago shook his head and tried to smile. "In the vids, nobody worries about cracked lips and what the air smells like when the scrubbers are old." The girl nodded, hugged herself tighter, and watched the numbers slide toward 18. "Admiral," Palladium said, "the drones have accepted the posture and settled along our mirrors. I can pulse the comb webs to open a visual inspection bay that leads nowhere. If Vale takes the bait, she'll commit manned teams and formalize chain of custody in their own ledger." "Useful later," Kinlock said. "Not yet. I want her with a pen in her hand when we flip the page." Sol arched a brow. "We're writing a moment. We're giving the public a frame," Kinlock said. Outside the forward pane, a drift of dust caught the blockade lights and made a slow snowfall. "She believes doctrine is neutral. I want to show her doctrine creates events. Then I want her to feel the price in front of her staff. Doctrine without witness is just a mask." Kinlock lifted her palm. Phase 2 is live. The fleet breathed in with her. The humming deepened. The Kulin whisper became a hiss. The deck vibration tucked itself up into her bones. Hauler 12 walked forward on thrusters at a grandmother's pace, its silhouette fattened by comb web reflection until it looked like 3 ships nested one inside another. The drones edged backward to maintain observation spacing. Vale's voice sharpened. "Admiral, maintain your posture. Any acceleration beyond corridor load will be treated as hostile." "This is a walk, Prefect," Kinlock said, "not a run." "This is compliance," Vale said, "not negotiation." "We can do both," Kinlock said softly. "We do not mistake quiet for consent." Escalation 2 did not arrive as fire, but as paperwork. Vale transmitted a revised ultimatum with a subclause. Their legal office insisted on sampling from 2 representative carriers to confirm contents. "Submit a 20-pallet tranche," intoned the clause, "to be jettisoned into the inspection volume for capture." It came with a clock of its own. "You have 5 minutes to comply or be recorded as resistant." Vale let out a thin laugh that had no humor in it. "They changed the rule mid-play, which means they're worried." Sol said, "They need a cleaner narrative." Kinlock felt the deck's vibration steady as drives trimmed. "We'll give them a narrative," she said. "Gian, acknowledge the revised condition. Offer to present pallets from a flag to hold food, clothing, medical, nothing even a cynic could rename. And tell Vale we require proof of chain of custody logs transmitted to an open channel. That turns this into a public ceremony," Gian said, fingers moving. "Good," Kinlock said. "Ona, use the comb webs to paint 2 pallet stacks that aren't there. Hollow them with room enough for a man to crawl through. Then tie their visual to the back corridor we're braiding. We'll let them believe they're drawing us out. Instead, they step into our mouth." "Done," Vay said. Sweat sheened her upper lip. She smelled faintly of machine oil from a morning in maintenance. Inspection volume faked. Pallets look real enough to taste. Kinlock exhaled once. Slow. Palladium. When they bite, I want their collection drones inside our mirror combs. Once in, sink the door behind them. No cuts. No burns. Close like a parent's hand. Understood, the AI said, its voice barely more than a breath. The comb webs will enfold. A kind trap is still a trap. Civilian vignette in Huller 12's forward bay. A stevedore named Imani leaned against a crate and watched the pallet stacks flicker in her heads up. The air smelled like old rope and lemon disinfectant someone had splashed on a spill. "I can walk through those," she said to the loader chief, who chewed on the end of a cable tie. "And yet I can't." The chief grunted, half amused, half afraid. "Fleet magic," he said. "You ever seen a magician show their sleeves to a thief and still keep the watch?" Imani adjusted her gloves. "As long as the watch feeds Lark Station's kids. I don't care if the thief eats his hat." Compact drones nuzzled the inspection volume like curious dogs and then extended capture arms. They lifted nothing that looked like something and beeped satisfied telemetry. Vale's voice returned. Clipped. "We have your sample." "Maintain posture." "Chain of custody," Jian prompted. Voice a murmur. "Transmit your logs," Kinlock said. Vale hesitated one breath too long. "Transmitting," she said, and a scroll of packet receipts unfolded on an open channel. Their headers were crisp, their timestamps precise. Their pride showed at the edges like a polished boot. Palladium's tone warmed by half a degree. "We have them inside. Comb webs closed. Collection drones held. We control the audit channel for these items for the next 90 seconds before they attempt a second verification. Then we move," Kinlock said. "Rafi, advance the convoy by a whisper. Ona, bend the corridor so, to their eyes, we're still a shadow behind our own mirrors. Jian, keep Vale listening." Vale's voice, "Admiral, Prefect," Kinlock said. "You now hold proof you threaten families under conditions you defined as compliant. If you fire, you do it on record, after accepting sampling that showed bread and gauze." "We accepted a sample," Vale said. "Too fast. You could hide. Your drones are inside our web," Kinlock said. "You won't retrieve them without stepping where your own minds are hungry. I am telling you this because I prefer your people unhurt. I am telling you this because your policy is about to take a cost in front of your staff. Your pen will scratch your own name." The timer slid past 15 or 0. Sweat tickled behind Kinlock's left ear. She could feel the adhesive itch where her comm patch met skin. The convoy, under comb shadow, moved a kilometer. It felt like slipping a needle through cloth while someone watched for stitches. Vale went still. Her eyes cut to someone off camera. "Our policy," she said carefully, "is designed to minimize harm by imposing clear boundaries." "Then don't harm," Kinlock said. "Open the corridor by 9 degrees. We pass in file at a civilian pace. You keep your doctrine intact by not firing into a posture you've certified as compliant. Or you teach your doctrine's true lesson, on record, and live with its echo. Your alternative is to surrender to inspection," Vale said. But the iron had a crack now. "Dump what you call aid, which in our experience has fed riots we paid for later." "You pay for riots when you write hunger into law," Kinlock said. "We prefer to settle accounts with numbers, not collars. We measure in meals, not in threats." "Admiral," Vale said under her breath, "they're massing a beam at Node Herald. It won't hit the convoy, but it'll carve our comb webs and vaporize the drones we hold. They want to erase evidence." "Of course they do," Sol said, eyes narrowing. "If their audit flattens, it's as if nothing was ever risked." Kinlock's hand tightened on the rail until the tendon in her wrist protested. "Palladium, give me the arc if they cut. Show me the heat curve in their mirror channel." "Displayed," the AI said. On the holo, a thin white slash traced through their web with surgical malice. The heat budget flashed in tidy fonts. Palladium whispered, "Their coolant margin is poor. If they fire at that intensity." "Node, Herald will glow like a kiln, and their auxiliary crews will carry burns for days. Kinloch nodded. Gian, open our channel to their auxiliary deck. No message. Just let them hear their own beam spool. The deck vibrated with a rising hum that pressed faintly into teeth. Kinloch could smell a sharper bite of ozone as the flagship's capacitors spun up in sympathetic readiness. Vale snapped. You are abusing. I am letting your crews hear physics. Kinloch said. They can decide if this is the price they swore to pay. Heat does not take sides when it blisters. Civilian vignette in Hauler 3's cramped galley. An old cook named Min squeezed water onto a cloth and wiped the condensation from a viewport that was never meant for views. He stared at the distant Node Herald, a hard jewel in the dark, and felt a throb in his shoulder where an old strain remembered lifting too many sacks at once. He could smell onion from last night's soup stuck in the folds of his apron. A teenager beside him pressed her nose to the glass. It's pretty, she said. Min shook his head. Pretty is what a knife looks like to someone who has never been cut. The timer on the bulkhead clicked to 13:14, and both of them looked away. Admiral, Palladium said. Auxiliary channels on Node Herald show confused chatter. 2 crew chiefs are asking if the burns are worth the audit record. Their internal policy board is pinging with queries. Vale will have to answer. Let her, Kinloch said. The flag deck lights cast a gentle glare against the forward panes, reflected tiny in Sol's pupils. If she delays, the timer runs. If she fires, she scalds her own people. If she opens, she loses a piece of doctrine but saves face. Or she gambles we won't push, Vay said. Then we show her we can push gently, Kinloch said, and still move mountains. Steady does not mean small, Vale returned. Her collar caught a different light. She had turned to face someone older for a breath. Admiral Kinloch, she said. Reduce convoy acceleration and hold position. We will open by 3 degrees to permit a staggered pass. Not enough, Kinloch said. Vale's smile did not touch her eyes. You are not in a position to bargain. I'm not bargaining, Kinloch said. I am telling you what keeps your ledger readable. 9 degrees opens your corridor and preserves your claim. You avoided harm. 3 gives you an accident you'll then have to narrate as our fault. You will fail at that with the public chain of custody and your drones in our hold. You won't hold our drones, Vale said. I will, Kinloch said, until the convoy is clear. Then I will gift wrap them with a transcript of your burns, averted, and your policies near miss. You can hang that on your wall. Your proof will be yours, but the story will be everyone's. The deck felt warmer through the soles of Kinloch's boots. Drives were sipping extra to keep the comb webs taut. Her tongue tasted faintly metallic, a stress tell she'd learned to acknowledge and ignore. The timer rained down to 11:00. Kinloch lifted her head and spoke to the fleet. All hands, you are doing well. Keep the edges soft and the cores fixed. Remember, we teach first and fight only if forced. Palladium's voice followed like a second heartbeat. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Sol's mouth twitched. There's your stamp. There's our promise, Kinloch said. Promises are just lines until we bleed for them. Escalation 3 arrived in a shape Kinloch had hoped to avoid. The compact used a civilian tug as a shield. A small work tug. Hull painted with old Union stripes. Pivoted out of Node Herald's shadow. Shoved by a compact patrol cutter like a pawn, nudged forward on a board. They want to stand behind someone else's face, Vay said. Her voice went flat and very, very cold. Classic. Kinloch's fingers curled until nails dug her palm. She could smell hot dust rising from an overworked fan below the comm bank. Palladium. If they fire from that position, the AI said, the tug will take thermal bloom and paint us as villains to their port nets. It's a manufactured tragedy. The pilot's heartbeat just spiked. Jane, Kinloch said, hail the tug on a tight beam. Use the name on their registry. Copy, Jane said. Already moving. Work tug minnow. This is HRF Flag 12. Your heart's fast. If you can hear us, pulse thrusters twice. The tug pulsed once, then again. Shaky. Kinloch lowered her chin. Eyes on Vale's face. Get out from behind the minnow, Prefect. It chose to work for the port, Vale said. It did not choose to be your umbrella, Kinloch said. Open 9 degrees, and you can keep the illusion your doctrine never hurt bystanders. Keep the tug there, and you'll live with what the burns do to hands that hold spanners. The human face you borrow will be remembered. The silence stretched thin as wire. The timer bled to 0940, somewhere beneath the flag deck. A coolant valve rattled, then settled with a damp click. Kinloch breathed through her teeth. Ona, she said softly. Sneak a ribbon on us under the tug. If Vale refuses, and only if she refuses. I want us to be able to yank the minnow out of the bloom. I can do it. Vale said, it will cost us comb integrity. We'll lose 1 web and half our drone grip. Then price it, Kinloch said. Keep accounts. But the tug comes home if the beam fires. We'll take heat, Sol warned. Literally and politically. We'll take burns named. Kinloch said, better than graves unnamed. We pay what we choose, not what they assign. Civilian vignette on the minnow. A pilot named Kesh gripped her sticks and tried to keep her breathing in time with the tug's ancient ventilation wheeze. The cabin smelled like old coffee spilled into a carpet she never had time to replace. A blister of sweat crawled down her spine under the harness. She could see Node Herald out her left port, a piece of geometry that had once meant safety. Her right port showed the human convoy, fat-bellied haulers, some with paint worn to primer, all held in a calm that didn't feel calm. A voice had said her name, the old name nobody on this port used except to form once a year. 2 pulses. She had told her hands, be brave in small ways. She pulsed. She waited. She whispered to the tug, don't let my hands shake when they write the report. Vale reappeared, jaw tight. We open by 6 degrees, she said. Final offer. 9. Kinloch said, the number is not arbitrary. It turns your kill box into a corridor. 6 only widens the mouth. Your doctrine likes mouths. I prefer exits. 8. Vale said, that is the line. Kinloch tasted blood where she had bitten her cheek earlier in the morning drill. She glanced at Vale. If we accept 8, do we keep our ribbon under the minnow? We can, Vale said, tapping a new vector into the holo. But it will fray if the beam glances it. Kinloch looked back to the camera. 8, she said. Move the tug out of the beam's path, or I pull her myself and return your drones with a note about your manners. Admiral, I'm done asking, Kinloch said. Your polite words will not erase your hands. Node, Herald shifted. The tug slid sideways, a grudging step by someone who had noticed an audience. The beam did not fire. The corridor opened by 8 degrees. The drones in their comb cages hummed like flies caught in thin amber. The timer ticked to 0800. Convoy. Sol called on the fleet net, voiced the shape of confidence poured into a mold. Advance on my mark. 4 meters per second. No bursts, no chatter. Taste the air. Listen to your hull. The convoy moved. The flag deck's forward panes filled with the slow drift of haulers threading through light that had meant no, and now meant perhaps. Kinloch let her shoulders drop a degree. The deck's hum settled into the long note she loved best, the one that sounded like Patience riding a knife. Patient is not passive, it's a grip. Civilian vignette in Holer 9. Del Rey's boy counted his breaths with the strobe. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, he said. The way his father used to count steps to a bunk when the lights flickered at the old dock. Del Rey pressed her nose to his hair and smelled shampoo she had bought cheap from a vendor who loved kids and lied about margins. An alarm somewhere hiccuped and then went silent. The sound like a throat clearing and deciding not to speak. Numbers on the wall said Orosefifen or 12. The boy whispered, "Are we winning?" Del Rey said, "We're moving." Kinloch watched the tug's telemetry paint small. "Brave Arcs," Gian murmured. Minnow's pilot just sent a thank you in a maintenance code. It says, "My hands remember you. Forward it to medical," Kinloch said. "Someone there understands what that costs. Favor recorded is a future returned." "Admiral," Vey said, "compact cutters are repositioning to guard the widened corridor. They're pretending they always planned it. Also, Prefect Vale is signaling a policy review panel internally. Not public yet. It will be." Sol said, "People who loosen collars don't like to admit they tried choking first." "Hold the metaphor," Kinloch said, though a corner of her mouth tugged. The air tasted drier now. The scrubbers had found a rhythm. "Gian, inform Vale that we will release her drones once the last hauler clears the cone. Let her know we'll include audit logs, the auxiliary heat budget, and the recording of the tug. Then ask if she would like to make a joint statement about preventing harm." "Joint statement?" Vey asked. Startled. "Offer it," Kinloch said. "Let her walk where we want her. If she refuses, the offer still exists on record. Invitations can be weapons when sharpened with grace." The convoy flowed like syrup around a plug as they threaded past Node Herald. The heat shimmer near the mine curtain made the stars ripple and smear like a painting stroked before it dried. Holer 12's captain whispered a prayer over an open mic and then swore when a tiny drone bumped his flank and left a smear of scuffed paint, no larger than a thumbnail. "That's a day's work for some kid's mother," he muttered, choking up, then killed his mic. Kinloch rubbed the heel of her hand under her left eye and felt grit. "Admiral," Palladium said, "Node Herald is cooling. Auxiliary crews are celebrating the absence of burns. I have isolated 3 voices composing messages they will send home on off shifts. These will leak. Let them," Kinloch said. "Let the truth walk. Truth travels even when you chain its feet." The timer reached 0500 and Kinloch let herself count the beats between seconds. A small, human ritual. Sol's tablet pinged. He swept the alert open with a thumb scarred from a training accident years ago. "Damage report," he said. "Hauler 7's port guidance fin took a scrape from a drone trying to observe inside our comb shadow. Surface only. We'll file it with the record. Also, 2 crew on Carrier Lumen have heat rash from standing too close to a radiator that cycled hard under stress." Kinloch nodded. "Log both. Names attached. And send salve to Lumen with a note that says we saw." "Ledgers matter because people do." Vale returned to the screen, shoulders edged in a new rigidity that read as resignation stapled inside pride. "Admiral," she said, "once your last carrier clears, you will release our property and depart Her eyes flicked to a second screen, where someone fed her lines. We acknowledge that our policy is under internal review and will be clarified in guidance. Good, Kinloch said. Clarity prevents burns. Don't gloat. Vale snapped, fast and too human. This isn't gloating, Kinloch said, softer than she felt. This is relief. Relief is a quiet that rings after metal. Civilian vignette on carrier lumen. Nurse Yago passed a tin cup of cool water to the teenager who had asked about vids. She sipped and then pressed the cup to her cheek, listening to the hum like a cat listening to a washing machine. Around them, crates creaked as straps settled. Someone had begun to slice open a pallet of bandages and then stopped, hands shaking in the good way. Yago smelled the faint medicinal mint that always leaked from fresh rolls. He checked his gloves, flexed his fingers, and blinked hard once. The timer said 03:33. The numbers felt like they had teeth, and suddenly didn't. Admiral, Palladium said, 2 compact cutters are moving to the far side of the corridor, where our comb webs thin. It's a flanking gesture to save face. They can't fire without recording their own posture contradiction. But they want us nervous. Let them preen, Vey said. We can keep them in the mirror until the last hull passes. Don't say mirror, Sol murmured with a smile that almost broke into a laugh. Bad luck. We don't believe in luck, Kinloch said. We believe in work, and we are very tired. As Hauler 9 slid past the last bright teeth of the mine curtain, its starboard sensor boom clipped a glimmering bead of chaff that had drifted loose from the comb web. The boom sparked a quick blue kiss, and the hauler twitched just enough to make 4 different compact drones stiffen in their housings. Vey's eyes went predator sharp. Hold them, she breathed. If they pulse, their own fuse patterns will read their fear as a shot. Palladium, Kinloch said, sing. The AI's voice went out over the corridor, over compact channels, over the convoy. A thin harmonic that made the hairs along Kinloch's forearms lift. It wasn't music, and it wasn't words. It was a measured waveform that told sensors the difference between a stumble and a punch. Drones eased. The hauler righted. 1,000 shoulders loosened by a millimeter. Sometimes survival is just a note held true, Admiral Jin said, tears unexpectedly bright in his eyes. The minnow sent a heart emoji in maintenance code. Then she sent the old Union badge. Kinloch nodded once, hard. Send back a wrench, the good kind. A small laugh escaped Vey, broken and grateful. Civilian vignette in the minnow's cabin. Kesh let her head touch the bulkhead and felt the cold press a map of reality against her skin. The air smelled like someone had scrubbed a mark with citrus cleaner years ago, and the ghost of that decision still hovered. Her hands shook a little, and she pressed them flat and thought of all the small things hands could do when they weren't being used to shield lies. Apparat the port. The convoy slid by like planets deciding to be moons for a minute. She whispered, "Go," like a person watching a child cross a street. The hardest part is not running, it's walking away slowly. The timer fell to 0140, Sol said. Last 2 haulers entering clear space. Sweat cooled under Kinloch's collar. She resisted the urge to pull at the fabric. Palladium, she said. Prepare to release the drones with the audit ribbons tied tight. Send Vale the bundle with a line in plain language, no burns today. Keep it that way. Composed, Palladium said. The AI's presence felt like a hand at her spine, upright and certain. Vale appeared, resigned into authority. Release, she said. We will, Kinloch said, when our last hauler clears the cone. Of course, Vale said. Your of course arrived late, but we'll take it. The convoy reached clear space with the modest grace of ships that had already lived hard lives and intended to live a little more. The mine curtain blinked a lazy yellow, as if embarrassed by its own brightness. Kinloch felt like the air grew cooler by a whisper. Maybe it was only her blood settling. She glanced at Sol. He looked older by a year and younger by 10. "Release the drones," Kinloch said. Vay tapped a sequence, and the comb webs loosened. The caught drones drifted free. Wobbling like insects dazed by a window they finally found open. Audit logs streaked across public channels with their chain of custody intact and annotated in the clear. Vale's mouth twitched as if she had tasted something both bitter and necessary. "Convoy," Sol said. "Course set for Lark Station. Pick up speed to comfortable. Drink water. Breathe. Breathe. But do not forget who made you hold it. Civilian vignette. On. Carrier Lumen." Yago finally let himself sit on a crate and stretch his back until something popped in a way that promised relief rather than injury. The smell of mint was stronger now. Someone had been stress-opening bandage rolls just to feel soft in their hands. The teenager handed him the tin cup. "You were right," she said. "The vids don't tell you how your tongue feels when you're afraid." Yago nodded. "They also don't tell you how sleep tastes afterward." He smiled. "Like victory minus shouting." Kinloch let her gaze rest on the narrows they had passed, and the silent node herald beyond. She could still taste ozone. The deck's hum now felt like a cat that had crawled into her lap and fallen asleep. Jian said softly, "Message from Lark Station. If you make it, the ovens will be hot. Transmit back." Kinloch said, the words catching a little. "Tell them we're bringing flour. Flour. And a story that won't burn." Palladium cleared its synthetic throat, a habit it had learned from Sol as a gentle preface. "Admiral, Prefect Vale is requesting a closed exchange." Kinloch exhaled. "Put her through." Vale's face, without the sled of staff behind it, looked smaller. "You pulled the tug," she said. "I didn't," Kinloch said. "You moved it." Vale's jaw worked once. You threatened my drones," she said. "I held them where they couldn't hurt anyone," Kinloch said. "You got them back, and we all got out with fewer scars." Vale looked away, then back. "There will be a review." "There should be," Kinloch said. "I'll send you our footage. Cut it into your case, whichever way helps your people keep their skin. You can keep your pride. Just lose the knife." The fleet eased into a new formation, open and loose, now that the corridor was behind them. The stars ahead felt wider somehow, as if they had been vacuumed clean. Kinloch rubbed her wrist where attendants still complained. "Ona," she said. "Inventory the webs we burned. I want a count and a thank you to every engineer who stitched them in a hurry." "We used 6 out of 8 comb packs," Vay said. "I'll write the thank you myself." "Raffi," Kinloch said. "Draft the convoy report. Keep it dry. Numbers first. Losses, names, burns, gains. Attach the audit log and the public footage in 3 secure mirrors." Her lips quirked at the word, and she didn't take it back. "Jian, schedule a debrief with the hauler captains. 2 minutes each to curse me or thank me in private." "They'll mostly thank you," Sol said. "They'll mostly curse," Kinloch said, and her smile this time reached the corners of her eyes. Gratitude is quieter than anger, but both teach. Civilian vignette in Hauler 9. Del Rey unbuckled her son and let him run a hand along the bulkhead where condensation had gathered into a bead. He rubbed it between his fingers and laughed at the cold, sliding sensation. The cabin smelled less of fear and more of old metal and the ghost of lemons. A man with the grease-burned palm took the cloth off and flexed. "Going to sting tomorrow," he said, calm now that tomorrow existed again. People began talking about bread as if it were a person they would soon hug. "Admiral," Palladium said softly, "I have a request from Lark Station Broadcast Council. They would like a representative to speak when we arrive. They want to hear how we moved without throwing a punch." "We threw one," Vey muttered. "We just used silence as a fist. Then we can explain what it means to strike that way." Kinloch said. She could feel the faintest vibration shift as they accelerated, smooth as cream poured. "Line up Chief Engineer Havel or Nurse Yago. People trust hands more than admirals. Hands tell stories better than rank." Saul looked down at his tablet and then up again. "You did well," he said simply. Kinloch tilted her head. "We did well." Palladium. "Yes, Admiral. Pull the data for the system-scale corridors in Sector 18, she said. "The Aero Compact won't stop with one gate. They'll reframe and try again with prettier words." "I have an idea," Vey said, eyes bright now. Tiredness tucked under purpose. "We show them an open corridor that is actually the mouth of a room where words become weights. A place where every ultimatum they issue rings back at their own policy board. We could call it a hall or a chamber, but the engineers will call it something rude and useful." "Teach me the rude part later," Kinloch said. "Show me the useful now. The road ahead is where we change the map." Palladium expanded a new holo. Vectors crisscrossed a system like threads in a loom. If we seed comb webs along the legal traffic lanes and run our audit channels as bright as beacons, we can flip an open corridor into a place where any doctrine that requires public harm collapses under its own display. They will have to face their cost in real time, witnessed by the people and the policy effects. We don't disarm them. We invite them to put their hand on a hot plate labeled with their own name. Sol whistled softly. A killbox turned inside out. "A mere hall," Vey said, and then glanced apologetically at Sol. "Sorry." He shrugged. "You said it, not me." Kinloch tasted the air and found it clean enough to breathe without noticing. "We build it," she said. "But before we do, we sleep. Even cathedrals start with men and women who took a nap. Sleep is a strategy when you choose it." Civilian vignette on the minnow. Kesh finally took her hands off the sticks and watched the tremor in her fingers ease to a polite twitch. She opened a pocket tin and dabbed a little balm at the corner of her mouth where stress had cracked the skin. It smelled like wintergreen and home. Out the port, someone had left a comb web strand floating, glinting like a spider's boast. She laughed once, because spiders didn't boast. They built. She keyed a private message to the maintenance channel at Node Herald. When they ask what happened, tell them we didn't cook ourselves to prove we could. Tell them hands stayed. She hit send and then closed her eyes. "We will build with ribs of light and rules." Kinloch stood alone for a breath after Sol and Vey stepped away to write their reports. The flag deck's glow turned the metal under her hand into pewter. She could hear, faintly, the heartbeat of the ship through the rail. Or maybe that was her own. "Palladium," she said, without turning. "Do you ever want to do the easy thing? I simulate desire," Palladium said. "It's not the same. But if it were, I think I would still prefer the clean thing over the easy. Systems live longer that way. I prefer the clean thing, too," Kinloch said. "I just wish it didn't take so much work." "Work is how you write a future," the AI said. "Writing hurts a little when you use your own blood." The convoy slid toward Lark Station and the promise of ovens, flour, and faces that would sleep without counting seconds. Behind them, Node Herald existed in a quiet that was not peace, but could become it, given enough repetitions of days like this. Kinloch rolled her shoulders and felt a pop that made her breath hitch with relief. She let herself think of bread for exactly one heartbeat, then tucked the thought away as a reward. "Admiral," Jean said. Voice cautious. Signal from the Aero Compacts Policy Board. They want to schedule a joint panel after delivery. Terms to be negotiated. Saul's eyes widened. That was fast. "They're bleeding at the edges," Vey said. "You can measure policy by how quickly it asks for better clothes." Kinloch nodded. "We will attend. We will bring names, not just numbers. Names are the shapes of what we refuse to lose." Civilian vignette in Holer Nine's galley. Min ladled soup into shallow bowls and sprinkled the top with something green he'd coaxed out of a hydroponic tray that had sworn it was dead last week. The air smelled like onion and promise. People took bowls and didn't leave the room, the way people do when they want to be in heat and sound together. Someone knocked a spoon against a rim 3 times because that's what their mother did before anyone tasted. They all laughed because it was silly and human, and the laugh sounded bigger than the room that held it. Kinloch placed both hands on the rail again and let the metal's chill correct her posture. "Palladium," she said. "Start building the chamber Ona described. Quietly. Use the parts of the law that love sunlight." "Yes, Admiral," Air Palladium said. "I will begin by mapping which policies combust when spoken aloud. Speak their rules until they smoke." The flag deck settled into the gentle noise of a fleet that had done its worst work and found it was. This time. "Good work." Kinloch closed her eyes for a moment and saw the tug. The drones. The comb webs gleaming like frost. The minds blinking with a pride they did not deserve. She opened her eyes and saw stars pulling slowly toward them like friends late to a party, and unashamed. "Set your watches," she said finally. "We'll debrief in 2 hours. Then we bake. Bake bread, then build the trap. They thought we'd arrive hungry. We arrived ready." Lark Station gleamed like a lantern hung in tired hands. Docking thrusters burred under Admiral Mara Kinloch's boots. A deep purr that smoothed her heartbeat against the rail. The air smelled faintly of yeast and machine oil, a mix that promised both bread and repairs. Through the forward panes, she could see the first oven's exhaust halo, a heat shimmer like mirage water on a road. Behind the glass, children pressed faces to windows and fogged them with quick breaths. "Docking clamp 3, Sol said, eyes on his tablet. "Stutters when she's shy. Let her feel seen." "Clamp 3, Kinloch said. "You're the prettiest hinge in this system." The clamp thunked with theatrical modesty, and the deck vibration settled into a satisfied hum. A chorus of hisses threaded the corridor as pressure equalized. Voices in the convoy net went soft and unison, hands on rails, eyes on lines. Breathe. Bread smell slipped in like a rumor that was somehow true. Palladium, the fleet mind, conducted the choreography with small changes in light and tiny tone cues that only crews heard. "We don't arrive as heroes, we arrive as help." Civilian vignette on Lark's receiving bay. A baker named Shirin dusted flour over her forearms and wiped a warm wrist across her brow, leaving a white crescent. The mixers thumped in an easy rhythm that made her chest loosen. She scratched a note into a grease-stained ledger. "Oven 2 won't keep even heat past 40 minutes. Flip trays at 20. Steam rolled as she opened a door, and the smell of crusted wheat made 3 tired stevedores cry without warning. A kid in a knit cap asked if the bread would crackle like the old days. Sheeran smiled and pinched his cheek with flour-cold fingers. Somewhere above, a vent rattled and then settled. A small metal sigh. They moved pallets like a dance. Kinloch walked the line, letting the dock's grit crunch under her boots, letting people see her face at normal height and normal breath. Nurse Yago from Carrier Lumen explained dosages to a station medic while an elderly man leaned on a cargo mule and listened as if knowledge could be a blanket. Vei's sleeves were rolled. Grease smudge near her elbow, where she had fixed a motor that called itself temperamental. Gian laughed with a kid and taught him how to send a wrench emoji in maintenance code. No inflected speech can match the sound of working hands. A chime in Sol's tablet cut through the warm air. An imported sound that smelled like static even without a nose for it. "Admiral," he said, and the way his voice flattened made the bread smell tilt metallic. New broadcast. Aero Compact Regional Command. Sector 18. Kinloch wiped her palm on her sleeve and took the tablet. The ultimatum text was bare of adjectives, dressed in norms like law school clothes. All humanitarian corridors in Sector 18 now subject to stability checkpoints. Any convoy exceeding declared mass will be treated as hostile. Enforcement authorized by Ultimatum Doctrine, subsection 12. The countdown burned bright. 6 hours. Somewhere beyond Lark, and the big system lanes were already being laced with rules that made hunger into a compliance test. Sol's lips tightened. "They're building a prettier wall." "Palladium," Kinloch said, tasting a grit of cooling flour in the air. "Show me the lanes. Show me where words become wires." The holo rose above crates to paint lines through vacuum, a lattice of traffic vectors braided with new enforcement volumes. Vei whistled low. "They've set an open corridor that pinches 2 jumps in. It looks like kindness. It's a catch." "It's a hall," Kinlaw said softly, remembering Ona's earlier phrase. "We'll turn it the right way out. We prefer to turn rooms, not people." Civilian vignette preset piece in Lark's repair bay. A teen named Toru sanded a patch on a hauler's scuffed panel while his grandmother watched with arms crossed. The sander's buzz pressed into his palm bones. The dust tasted like pennies. A portable radio clicked between local songs and fleet updates. A heartbeat's glitch that made everyone look up at once. The new policy text scrolled, and Toru shut off the sander. "Another rule," he muttered. His grandmother took the sander from his hands and set it down gently. "Rules can be bent," she said, "but not if you're the only one pushing." On Flag Deck 3, Kinloch put both hands on the rail and felt the ship's pulse under the metal scuttle. Steady. "There. The open corridor is their stage," she said. "We will use it to make their cost visible before they can stage us." Vei's eyes were bright but rimmed. She'd slept the length of one kettle boiling. Comb webs aren't enough. They'll expect mirrors. "Then we bring witnesses," Kinloch said. "And law that doesn't need permission." Sol's brow ticked up. Public adjudication channels. Every alarm, every heat budget, every logged command. Kinloch said, "We tie their ultimatum to a live room where their board has to watch. We don't block their beam. We hold their hand over the plate while asking them to read the label. You can fake courage. You can't fake temperature." They built the chamber like carpenters who loved code. Vei and her engineers strung comb webs along legal lanes but anchored them to transponders that weren't military at all, port beacons. Union buoys. Pilgrim lights maintained by habit more than budget. Palladium threaded audit channels through them, bright as navigational stars. Gia negotiated with a federation of streamers whose hobby was watching traffic like others watched weather. He promised them first look and 1,000 mundane frames for each dramatic one. Name for the chamber, Saul asked, rubbing at a stress line between his brows. His fingertips smelled faintly of solder. Policy prism, Vey said, then winced. 2 on the nose. Kinloch smiled. On the nerve. Keep it. We build boxes that turn sound into sight. Civilian vignette preset piece. In a quiet room off Lark's council hall, a translator named Etta warmed her hands on a mug of tea that had steeped past good and into strong. Behind a glass wall, chairs waited under lights that made everything flatter than real. She tested headsets and adjusted gain knobs until her fingers remembered the right clicks by muscle. Papers smelled like ink and impatience. She circled the word checkpoint with a red pen and wrote its equivalents in 3 dialects, then added a place where we stop you to make you small. She underlined it twice. The panel started with boring dignity, which was a kind of armor. Prefect Sarah Vale stepped onto the feed from a clean room with a glass bowl of a microphone and a single pen set parallel to the edge of her desk. Kinloch stood at a station dais with a cheap mic that whistled once until Jean thumped it. The first questions were safe. How do you define contraband? What is compliance? How many minutes is kindness? Kinloch answered with nouns and subclauses, clean as the smell of isopropyl in an infirmary. Vale answered with policy that had been shaped on a lathe. When she said enforcement, her mouth softened as if she wished the word were softer. The stream tickers buzzed like a hive behind glass. Words can be blunt tools. We sand them. Palladium chimed into Kinloch's in-ear with a tone like a bell under a pillow. Scout ping. Sector 18. Lane 2. Compact open corridor, just shifted by half a degree. Their cutters are seeding minds that read like boys. They'll start the play before the panel ends. Kinloch kept her face even. Prefect, she said aloud. Your corridor moved. Your doctrine says public clarity prevents harm. So let's be clear. She nodded to Jian. The feed split. Viewers saw the lane from 3 angles, a hauler's nose cam smelling of cold and dust, a union buoy broadcasting in a gentleman's baritone, and a compact cutter weeping a line of mines like a ship with a bag of rice and a hole. Heat budgets danced at the bottom of the frame like stock prices nobody wanted to own. Vale's nostrils flared. Admiral, she said, this is not live. Kinloch said, time stamped. Your doctrine has a clock. So do ovens. Ours smell better. Vale, watch your rule. Touch a throat. Escalation. One of the new dance arrived as an order from Compact Commander Hrash Cato, a name Kinloch had read in reports that smelled like ink and iron filings. Cato loved the doctrine the way some men loved uniforms. He wore it to bed. He appeared in the policy prism feed, uninvited, a courtesy Kinloch had engineered by making the room so public it had no door to slam. Human fleet, he intoned, voice like crushed ice, maintain position. Dump any pallets exceeding declared mass, Tarisifu. You have 20 minutes. The number chewed at Vale's eye. She had promised 6 hours worldwide. Kinloch let the rail cool her palms. Commander Cato, she said, your 20 minutes contradict your prefect's 6 hours. You're either early or in contempt. Cato's lip twisted. We are correcting a misstatement. Is hunger a misstatement? Kinloch asked. Or your watch. Breathing is not a loophole. Stop negotiating air. Civilian vignette preset piece on a pilgrim barge entering Sector 18. A singer named Mara Lee, not the Admiral. A different Mara, with a different weight in her shoulders, tuned a cracked guitar near a heater that clicked with age. The barge smelled like wool and apples stored too long. A child handed her a string from a comb web stray, thin as a hair, and she wound it around a fret and giggled when it bit her fingertip. A grandmother rubbed salve into the cut and said, "Names matter." Yes, the singer played one chord that made the heater quiet for 2 seconds, as if listening. Kinloch's engineers deployed the policy prism in the lane, like fishermen setting a net made of ethics and math. Comb webs sang. Transponders shone. Audit channels hummed. Palladium pulled in Cato's voice with his own heat budget overlay so anyone could see how his order glowed with costs. Gian's streamers commented in half-jokes that made Realm Freight's bored dispatchers sit up with coffee forgotten. Cato ordered a stability inspection in the middle of the lane. Vale winced as the word stability scrolled next to a jittery accelerometer. Vay's hands moved in precise arcs. "Inspection volume faked," she whispered. "Echo corridor ready. Their drones will walk into a place where their own protocol demands a signature. Ready the release timers." Kinloch said, "If they grab ghosts, we hand them mirrors and ask them to sign with their real names. Your signature looks different when the ink is hot." Cato bit. Drones surged into the inspection volume, tried to lift pallets that existed only as thermal good manners, and tripped the prism's custody seal. On a dozen public screens, a neat message wrote itself: "Aero Compact Inspection Suite. Narration 4 has accepted sample X-17 from human convoy. Breeze. Chain of custody acknowledged. Public archive link seeded." The drones were not trapped. They were notarized. Vale's jaw locked. "Commander," she said on a second channel that the streamers heard anyway. "Hold. I will not be staged," Cato hissed. "They will not make theater of policy." "You made theater," Kinloch said, hearing the heat whine in Cato's beam capacitors like a kettle about to singe a hand. "We provided lights. Light exposes both the knife and who lifts it." Escalation 2 arrived coated in grief's paint. Cato ordered his cutters to move a refugee skiff into the inspection lane to test traffic resilience. The skiff's hull was a thin drum. The tap of a beam would make it sing and split. Vay's fingers flew, and the flag deck smelled suddenly like hot plastic from a patch panel she'd yanked too hard, ribbon under her keel. Vay whispered, sweat sliding along her temple. "We can tug. We will fray 3 comb strands." "How much heat?" Sol asked. "Enough to make our fingernails feel like they're burning," Vay said. Kinloch swallowed the taste of blood that rose when she pressed her tongue to an old cut. "Pull her. And when we log the cost, write the names of the strands we frayed." Vay yanked. The skiff slid like a bead on an invisible wire, just out of the inspection bloom. A cheer went up on 30 streams and choked down instantly. Kinloch's palm stung. She only then realized she'd crushed a stylus and inked her own skin. Sometimes mercy leaves splinters. We keep them. Civilian vignette on the skiff. A mechanic named Hadi smelled the sweet sour of a failing battery and the iron tang of fear. He had been pretending the heater worked when it didn't. When the tug came, invisible as a parent's hand at a curb, he set his jaw and stared at a bolt that had rusted and refused to move for 2 years. He put his wrench on it and turned. It moved. He laughed and then cried in a way nobody judged. Cato's feed shook from the bump of his own impatience. He threw the beam. The policy prism did not block it. It measured. Heat budgets flashed. Auxiliary crews on Cato's ships shouted that their palms were blistering. Vale swore. The clipped sound of a person who hated the taste of her own mouth. The beam carved air, hit nobody, wrote itself onto the public record in digits that smelled like a hospital's bleach. Kinloch didn't smile. She let the numbers fall like rain. Numbers are not weapons. They are witnesses. Now came the flip. Palladium's voice warmed. Something like pride without vanity. Admiral, if we invert the corridor vectors and shift the audit channels to the sidebands, we can invite Commander Cato's policy board into a validation room that demands a live sign-off for continued enforcement. They cannot proceed without their own public faces confirming the cost. Do it, Kinloch said. Make them walk into their own hearing. Faye's hands flicked. Jen counted seconds under his breath. An old exam habit made useful. Sol watched the heat curves and sipped air like a man testing soup. The prism unfolded a door shaped like a question. Do you wish to continue enforcement with the following observed costs? It listed burns, hours, food, people's names, 2 strands of comb web torn, 1 skiff saved. The cursor blinked like a throat. Cato slammed yes. Vale didn't. The policy board, a grid of men and women in government haircuts, hovered. A woman with oil under her nails clicked abstain. 2 others went, no. Another yes. The feed stuttered as their internal rules tried to cope with being seen. You cannot whisper your vote when the room is full. Civilian vignette preset piece. In a station common room where the floor smelled like lemon cleaner spread too thin. A janitor named Bolu paused mid-swipe and watched the votes like a man recognizing a face on a bus. His mop squeaked in the quiet. A teen beside him, the knit cap from before jammed over headphone hair, asked, "Does that mean we win?" Bolu shrugged. "It means they have to admit breathing hurts more with a hand over your mouth. Sometimes that's enough." Cato tried to fire again. The prism made the policy board sign on the line that said, "We acknowledge auxiliary burns will increase by X%. The number was not a moral. It was a blister. 2 more members click no. Vale's mouth opened. Shut. Opened. "Commander," she said. And in that word lived bread trucks and battered hands and a tug named Minnow and a skiff that smelled like failing batteries. "Stand down." "Prefect." Cato snarled. "Your weakness will cost stability." "Your strength," Vale said, "cost skin when you touch the stove. You don't blame the flame." Silence held for 3 breaths measured by the hiss of Flag 12's air exchangers. Then, with a professional motion that made everyone understand she was still in charge of herself, Vale clicked Suspend Doctrine Subsection 12, pending review. The policy prism wrote it across the stream in a font nobody could call fancy. The corridor lines softened like shoulders after shouting ends. Sol exhaled a sound between laugh and sob. Vey leaned on the console and left a dark sweat print shaped like an honest country. Jian wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand and swore softly in gratitude. Relief is a technical achievement disguised as a feeling. Costs surfaced as if summoned by the word. Engineer Havel burned his palm when a comb web splice arced. Medical sprayed cool and wrapped him and wrote his name in the ledger. A hauler's guidance fin complained and had to be unbolted. 2 mechanics scraped knuckles and added them to the record with pride that didn't try to be loud. The skiff's battery died a day early because adrenaline had convinced its owner he could coax it longer. The fleet diverted a new core and marked the hours lost to a column labeled time we spent on each other. "Attach the costs," Kinloch said, voice rougher than it had been an hour earlier. "Send them with the footage and the suspension notice. People deserve to see the price we paid to keep a higher bill from being written. Bills are stories. We choose whose names appear. Civilian Vignette. On the Pilgrim Barge, the singer finished her song, the last chord buzzing against the heater's click. She blew on her fingertips and smelled the faint metal of the comb web string that wasn't meant for guitars and yet played truer than she'd thought. A kid laughed high and bright. Someone down the hall coughed a cough that needed steam and soup. The guitarist tuned again, because that's what hands know when clocks change their minds. The panel ended not with applause, but with a procedural note. Vale schedule an emergency session where doctrine language would be put to a vote with public comment. Comment, Palladium murmured into Kinloch's ear. Already includes 1,000 notes from auxiliary crew about gloves that failed and gloves that worked. The AI tinged the words with something like relief that didn't try to be a human's. Kinloch rolled her wrist, tendons complaining in a way that meant she would sleep badly and wake fine. Invite Vale's crews to Lark for bread and salve, she said. Tell them they'll be received at a side dock with no cameras unless they ask for them. Kindness off camera is how you win tomorrow. Escalation 3. The last and the worst came from the side. As always, Gerdcato, red with humiliation and something like faith, took Cutter Sintra rogue. He shut off transponder, rebranded orders as piracy interdiction, and angled to take a bite from a barge with a registry older than his doctrine. The cutter's engine whined at a pitch that made Kinloch's molars ache, even across distance. Metal speaks one language. Vey drew a circle with 2 fingers. He's stepping outside the prism. Pull the prism to him, Kinloch said. And this time, if he fires, we interpose more than numbers. Sol met her eyes. Risk. Named, Kinloch said. Owned. She felt the flag deck's railing cool under sweat when she shifted her grip. Palladium's voice steadied like a press on a shoulder blade. We can project a comb sail in Sintra's face, big enough to scatter beam coherence. It will burn out like paper. We will lose it. We can make it look beautiful first. Make it look ordinary, Kinloch said. Beautiful gets misunderstood. Ordinary courage stands when the song ends. Civilian Vignette preset piece. In a cutter's mess, 2 decks down from Cato's bridge. A technician named Sarah unscrewed a panel to reroute cooling and smelled her own fear under the sweet stink of antifreeze. She had joined for regular meals and a uniform that meant people stopped ignoring her. She had stayed because routines can be a bed. Now the routines hissed steam. The panel was hot enough to scorch when it slipped and landed on her thigh. She swore and stuffed a rag between skin and metal. Above, the captain shouted words that didn't taste like orders used to. Sarah whispered, I want to go home. To a screw that couldn't care. Vey pushed the comb sail between Sintra and the barge. The sail drank heat like a martyr and went black at the edges. It did not look pretty. It looked like a screen door catching a thrown rock. Cato fired. The beam skittered into glare and fizz. Wrote itself into the prism anyway, because Palladium had dragged the hearing room fast as an ambulance. Vale said nothing. Her policy board said nothing. The people said everything in the space around the words. Kinloch rubbed her palm where the stylus ink had dried. The smell of it made her think of forms signed by hands that didn't own the names on them. Cato is now piracy, she said flatly. Not doctrine. Mark it, Sol said. Law loves labels. Labels can be shields when you write them honest. The barge slid on, its hull ringing with heat's ghost. Cutter Sintra hesitated, then flicked a thrust that read as a flinch. The prism wrote Sintra acting beyond doctrine. Internal referral recommended. Vale's gaze went to a far corner of her screen, where Kinloch imagined a staff officer in a cheap jacket shaking their head with vigor. "Palladium," Kinloch said, voice gone soft with the kind of tired you earn. "Send Cato's mother our footage." "I don't have her address," the AI said. "You will," Kinloch said. "Some doors open when you knock with a story." It ended not with a shot, but with a meeting booked and a ship limping away under the weight of a name it had earned. The policy prism dimmed itself down to a set of public archives with timestamps, heat curves, and names. Links that anyone could carry like a talisman against. It never happened. Vale signed the suspension. Cato's chain of command initiated an inquiry using forms that smelled like old coffee and grudges. Lark Station's ovens turned out loaves with crackling shoulders. And Sheeran wrote extra steam at 10 minutes because she had finally fixed the vent. Sol sank into a chair and put his tablet on his knee like a sleeping cat. Vey sat on the deck, back against a console that hummed like a friend. Jan leaned his forehead against cool glass and fogged it with a breath he hadn't realized he held. Kinloch stood and let the flag deck's low light flatten her into a person with a shape and no halo. "Palladium," she said. "Log our costs." She recited names as if counting beads. Havel's palm, 2 knuckles from hauler 6, 3 comb strands, 1 sail, 14 hours of rerouting, battery core, the skiff's fear, and the tug's thank you. Palladium said. The AI's voice was a page turning. "Thank yous are currency. We spend them carefully." Civilian vignette. At Lark's infirmary door. Sarah, the technician from Sintra, who had slipped quietly off duty and quietly not returned, stood with her hat in her hands. The infirmary smelled like antiseptic and steeped black tea. The nurse at the desk looked up with eyes that had seen too much and still widened for new people. "Heat blisters?" the nurse asked. Sarah nodded. "And something else," she said. "I think it's shame. The nurse didn't write it down." She poured tea. The fleet slept in shifts and dreams where numbers braided with hands. Kinloch closed her eyes in a chair, not a bed, and woke with a line of rail stamped on her forearm. The ship's heartbeat through the metal felt like a friend telling her not to apologize for it. When she stretched, something popped in her shoulder and let breath in deeper than before. Dawn in space is a matter of agreement. They agreed. Ovens opened. Reports filed. The policy prism went into maintenance mode, and Palladium purred through its checks, like a cat finding a sunny square. Vale sent a terse note. "We will rescind subsection 12 pending council vote. Interim order humanitarian corridors exempt from punitive enforcement." It was language that moved in clothes it wasn't used to. Sometimes the first step is ugly. It's still a step. Precedent lock aftermath. The Aero Compact's Ultimatum doctrine. Subsection 12 was suspended and then struck. Enforcement privileges to declare ad hoc punitive fires against civilian carriers were rescinded. Any future stability checkpoint required public audit channels and third-party custody logs, or it didn't exist. Lore stamped again as gossip more than decree. This fleet teaches with numbers and remembers with ledgers, never with collars. The words walked faster than memos. "We keep our rituals because they tell us who we are." Costs continued to ripple. Vey's forearm blistered where a snapped tie had kissed skin. She refused to let medical take a picture, and then let them anyway, because she knew records matter. Jian lost his voice for an hour, from too many words thrown into too little air. He drank honey and made do with hand signals like an amateur conductor. Sol smiled at nothing and realized it was because his back didn't hurt. For once fear had kept him from noticing, and the absence of fear made space for pain, which meant the body believed in a later. Kinloch and Vale met again, privately and recorded. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and nerves. Vale looked tired clean rather than tired hard. "I do not like being taught," she said. "I like being alive," Kinloch said. Vale huffed a laugh that wasn't generous enough to be called shared. "We learned," she said, each syllable like a coin. "Do not make a religion of it." "I prefer bread," Kinloch said. "Nothing holds a room like loaves on a table." Civilian vignette. At Lark Square, Sharon set out 6 loaves and a tub of salted butter that sweated in the heat. The square smelled like garlic, oil, and the lift of yeast. People pretended not to crowd while absolutely crowding. Toru brought his grandmother the first heel, because heels were the point where crust met soft, and that's where life lives. Bolu leaned his mop against a post and took a slice no bigger than his palm and ate it with the reverence of someone swearing simply to keep sweeping. Palladium floated a question when the square had thinned. "Admiral, do you want to keep the prism always on?" "On," Kinloch said, but polite. "Rooms with lights don't have to glare." She rolled the word "on" around her mouth like a seed. It tasted like work and rest in fair allotment. The flag deck hummed. The rail was cool. The ship smelled faintly of warm dust, as honest as a floor after kids run through wet. Kinloch thought of all the times she'd held herself still to make stillness sharp. "We will write a clean summary," Sol said, not asking. "We'll publish it sober. We'll include names." Kinloch said, "Names are the closest thing to immortality we deserve." A last Ripple Cato recorded a statement because men like Cato cannot not speak. He framed it as a defense of discipline. Then, as if some heat lingered under his skin that made the truth slip out, he said, "We will procure better gloves." The line walked faster than his justification. Someone turned it into a joke, then a vow, then a supply order. Sarah watched the order process, shook her head, and felt something unclench between her lungs. Kinloch drafted her final report on a tablet that smelled like plastic warmed by too many hands. She kept sentences under 20 words because it kept the truth from spilling into poetry where people could hide. She wrote about comb webs and heats and skiffs and tugs and a word called stability that had been asked to carry too much. She ended with a promise made in quiet now and to be kept in noise later when faced with doctrine that assigns pain to make a point. They would bring a room, a clock, a ledger, and a hand open enough to catch a scalding thing without throwing it at someone else. A crisp physical image lived beside the last paragraph blockade lights deemed, public tally confirmed, and the prism's panels cooled to pewter as heat bled away. We came with bread and numbers and left with fewer burns than the math predicted. If you ask me what we did, I'll say we set a table where policy had laid a trap. We placed the invoices next to the plates. We invited those who wrote the bill to eat what they ordered while the children watched. I have learned to let quiet carry knives we no longer need. I have learned to stop where the skin of my enemy would start, not because it is hard, but because it is easy to fail. When they write about this, they will call it restraint. I call it a recipe measure heat. Keep names. Serve mercy hot. We carry ovens into their ultimatums and bake a way out.